I had a thought. I know it's dangerous to think, but I did have a thought. That thought is that if we look at Google's history, how anti-consumer they are, how they spy, steal, take, use, abuse its consumers, its users and stuff like that. How predatory they are as a company. If you think about it, Google is no different from Apple or Microsoft. Some people may even say they are worse than Apple and Microsoft as a company. And people have been saying that for decades, both on the Apple side, the Microsoft side, the open source side and stuff like that. To some degree on the open source side, because that's what this video is about. I wonder when I talk with Linux people, and I've been talking to Linux people for over 20 years, and especially in the newer generation of Linux users, they love to dangle Android in my face and other people's face when we are saying that Linux is not that used for a consumer. Yeah, we can agree that Android is a fork or base or what you would call it of Linux, but it is not Linux. Even the developers themselves don't recognize it as Linux. Why is that? Well, they take Linux and they modify it quite a lot. And they use a lot of proprietary bits and bobs, which the Linux community don't really like other people doing. The Android operating system is probably the most intrusive system on your person and personal data and privacy that exists to this day. The most. Linux users don't seem to mind that. So I kind of had this, like, why is it like every time we talk about open source, Google is kind of the poster boy or the poster girl or the poster orangutan or what you would call it for how great open source is. While they are doing the exact same thing that they are bitching and moaning about Apple is doing, Microsoft is doing, and every other company. Why are we not angry at Canonical? Why are we not angry at Red Hat for doing anti-consumer practices? People are a little bit angry at Canonical, but Red Hat and Oracle, but probably Red Hat is probably the worst, like one of the most bad open source companies that gets out there. They killed off CentOS. Nobody really talked about that. They saw a project competing with them. So they did what Microsoft tends to do. They were like, come under our wing, let's us take care of you. But we need to be you need to make a council, and we need to have the final vote in that council and be, basically controlling the fucking project. And then when CentOS just kept getting more and more popular, then Red Hat basically taking market share out of Red Hat and money out of Red Hat's pocket. What did they do? They killed it off for CentOS Stream, because the plain old CentOS was competing with Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Had Microsoft done that, and Microsoft are doing that to projects, they're taking them under their wing, taking control, and killing them off, or morphing that technology into the Microsoft technologies. Google are doing it in massive fucking strokes, buying up companies, taking projects under their wing, being controlled and manipulating them to then take over the technology. Apple is doing it. But we rarely hear people on the open source community and Linux saying much bad thing about Linux. We hear them bitch and moan about Microsoft. Microsoft is the poster boy for the... Microsoft, if Linux is Christ, Microsoft is Antichrist. Microsoft is the devil, Linux is Christ. Even though that if you compare with what Microsoft is doing compared to other companies in the world, it may not be as bad as you think it is. They are, like I said, Google, YouTube, even though YouTube is owned by Google, it functions somewhat independently. You hear all of these people sitting and bitching and moaning about Microsoft Edge browser and Microsoft this and Microsoft that, while they're sitting on Facebook, YouTube, running Chromium. Even Chromium is a fucking, like, don't get me started on Chromium, it's not what you think it is. There's a lot of fucking shit in there that shouldn't be there. But they still see Google as, look at what we can do with open source. And yes, we can do a lot with open source. We can do a lot with all kind of licenses. But it also shows you that just because it's open source, people still do bad things with it. And like I said, Google the last probably 15, 20 years is probably the worst intrusive company that ever have existed. Their whole business model. They invented the business model of you being the product by giving away things for free where you were the product. But still, you rarely hear open source or Linux people saying anything negative about about Google. We don't like what everyone else is doing, but because Google is using a lot of open source technology, or Red Hat, or other big companies within the Linux circles, we kind of are like, it's okay, it's open source. Like the Android system is a bastardization of what everything open source stands for. If you really are a believer in open source, you should hate Android. If you're really a component of individual freedom, personal choice about what is being done to you on the internet, you should want Google to not exist and all of its technologies. You should not be watching me right now on this platform if that's what you really believe. Makes me wonder. So when I think about that, I'm like, well, why is it not okay for Microsoft to do it, but it's okay for Red Hat, Canonical, SUSE, and Google to do these things, just to name a few people that do bad things and have been done bad things in the past that we will criticize Microsoft over. And I think it just comes down to, well, Microsoft is mostly a proprietary company. And Microsoft has been the devil for decades now in the open source and Linux community. Basically, it's like they have hated Microsoft for so long that they now have been blindsided by other companies. It looks like it. I'm not saying it is like that, but it looks like it. If you hate what Microsoft is doing or have done, Microsoft is still a bad company. If you don't, they still take shit they should not taking. They're still doing things they should not be doing, but not to the degree that Google is doing it. Like I said, Google pioneered you as a product online. They pioneered, to some extent, software as a service. I pay $2 a month for 100 gigabytes of data storage. Why can I do that cheap, even though in my opinion, it should be free because they are utilizing my data and making billions of dollars on my data as it is already. But why can they do it that cheap? Because you are still the product. You are giving them more than they are giving you. Always remember this. Again, to go on a little side tangent here. If you're getting something really, really cheap or for free, you are giving them something way more valuable that they otherwise have to pay way more for than giving you something for free or really, really cheap. Think about that. Now they turn a little bit towards Canonical. Oh, Canonical wants to be Microsoft, is doing Microsoft practices. No, Canonical and Red Hat and all of the other big, massive companies in Linux that do things you don't like are doing the exact same things that any company do in a market. It's how business is being done. Business is not fair, okay? Life is not fair. It will never be fair. But I think what it comes down to, and this is me speculating, I'm not saying this is a fact, it's just me thinking out loud. I'm not married to this idea. But I think it comes down to, well, they are contributing to open source, they're using open source, they're sponsoring open source, so it's okay that they are bad to us. So we are kind of okay with Google doing everything that Microsoft and Apple is doing, and doing it way worse than they are doing it, because they're giving us stuff, they're giving us shiny things. Like, if you think about all of the money that Google have made of Android, how much of that have come back to the Linux kernel or the Linux project? I do hear Linux people going over to Brave search and DuckDuckGo search and alternative search engine, but still, the majority of Linux people I hear are still using Google products. No matter if you're using VPNs and stuff like that, you are still being used. Sometimes we hear these de-Googling your phone, but they're still running Android. Oh, so it's not really helping that much. Because Android is still taking way more than any apps is taking of data and telemetry. So you may not use Gmail, Google search, but you're still using Android. So it's like, yeah. Oh yeah, I take the candles off the fucking cake, so now it's more healthy. Or I take off the whipped cream and now I'm living the healthy lifestyle while you're eating the fucking cake. You're like only scraping away a really, really thin layer. I honestly don't know or don't get why is it that we allow companies to do exactly the same things that we are yelling at Microsoft and Apple for doing. I feel it's a little bit like when you're using Android as an example, it's a little bit like they're grasping for straws to give a good example of how great Linux is for the average consumer. And there's no real good, thing to point at other than Android, which again is a fork or heavily altered or somewhat altered version of Linux. So why are we grasping to? And even if Android was pure Linux and stuff like that, they still are heavily fucking infusing it with proprietary bits and bobs and taking way more telemetry and personal data than you can ever dream of. So why is it okay to use that as an example of how great Linux is when we are yelling and screaming at Microsoft for doing the same thing and doing less of the same thing? Let me know down below, because I'm really curious. Down below. See you all later. Bye bye.